Your Spirit podcast, a place where friends and family gather to share stories of hope during the big moments in life, the small moments in life, and the messy in between. I'm your host, Jill Dobrowansky, and I hope that you find encouragement and remember that whatever season you are going through, you are not alone. Sit back, plug in, prepare your hearts as we feed your spirit. Hi, listeners. Welcome to another episode of Feed Your Spirit. On today's show, I have the chance to sit down and talk with Christine Yager. Christine lives in Texas with her husband and two young girls, with another girl on the way due this fall. She is a blogger who also recently launched a small business called Mirror Ministry, which gives young girls messages of hope and reminds them of God's love for them. What I loved most about our conversation is when Christine shows her vulnerability and openly talks about her infertility and losing her identity in wanting to be a mom so desperately. But then it is when she was reminded of Romans 8:28, in which it says, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him and those who have been called according to his purpose." I hope you enjoyed today's conversation as much as I did having it. So sit back, plug in, prepare your hearts as I feed your spirit. I'm joined by Christine Yager, who's a new friend to the show, and I'm very excited to get to know her and hear a little bit about her story today and what she's going to be sharing with you. So welcome to the show, Christine. Why don't you start by telling my listeners a little bit about yourself, about your family, where you live, things of that nature.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to talk to you. My husband, Michael, and I have been married for 13 years, and I live in Texas. We have two daughters, Elizabeth, who is 5 years old, and Catherine, who is 2. And we have a third daughter that is on the way, due in October. I used to work as an engineer in transportation research, but I am now blessed to be a stay-at-home mom to my girls. So I'm very thankful for that opportunity.
Oh, congratulations. That's very exciting to hear that you're growing your family still also.
Yes.
And I believe you also have a new addition to your family, also in the way of a puppy?
Yes, she is precious.
Oh, so cute. The girls must love him.
Yeah, she's a perfect fit for our family.
That's great. Why don't we just get right into this? Because you reached out to us about being a guest on the show, which always excites me, and told me a little bit about your story. But why don't you start by giving our listeners maybe some backstory and then about kind of how your family's come to be today?
So we got married in 2007, and we wanted to have kids eventually, but we wanted to enjoy, kind of like just us for the first few years. And so about 3 years into our marriage, we had a pregnancy scare, and air quotes there. But I was several days late for my period. And by scare, I just mean that it would have been fine, but it was just not our plan to have kids yet. Because we're both planners and like that control, But I was surprised when I felt disappointed when the test was negative. And that just really lit a desire to become a mom. And God just steadily grew that over the next several months. I waited many months for Michael to come around to the idea of trying soon because he didn't feel ready yet. And so later that year in December, this was 2010, we agreed that it was time to start trying. And, again, planners. So I had it all planned out. I thought we would conceive right away. That's what sex ed teaches you, is that you shall not have sex, else you will get pregnant.
Yes, I remember those lessons well.
And I thought like, oh, this will be perfect. We'll get to tell our family on Christmas morning. But then that didn't happen. And then the next month, nothing. And the next month, nothing. And just as a typical type A person or Enneagram 1 or whatever personality test you like to look at, I jumped into control mode, and I became completely obsessed with trying to conceive and tracking my cycles and all those silly acronyms that you see on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
And it started to harm our marriage because I was focusing more on creating this potential child than just loving my husband well. And I was just totally obsessed with trying to find the correct formula to create a life instead of recognizing that life only comes from the Lord.
Mm.
We had diagnostic testing done and it was all normal. We were classified as unexplained infertility. For someone who likes control, that can be the most frustrating thing, to not have an answer. And so the next 2 years, 2011 and most of 2012, they were my darkest years. I felt forgotten and abandoned by God. I felt left behind compared to my friends who seemed to so easily be able to have children. I felt, stuck from moving forward to the next stage of life, parenthood, that I just so desperately wanted. That lack of control just led to me struggling with depression and hopelessness. In hindsight, I realized that I had a very skewed perspective about God. I wondered if maybe my past sin or Michael's past sin were to blame for our situation and our suffering. I wondered if I could even call myself a woman because my body couldn't do what it was supposed to be designed to do. Comparison was a big struggle. And the thing about comparison is that it only leads to feelings of inadequacy or superiority, nothing in between. There's just nothing good that comes from comparing. And so I would either have thoughts of superiority, like, why does she deserve a baby and I don't? Mm-hmm. Or thoughts of inadequacy, like, well, I should just get over my pain because at least I haven't gotten pregnant and had several miscarriages like some friends I know. And so I have no reason to be so sad, And it was just really a hard time of life. I felt surrounded by pregnant women and babies and had dreams that I was the only woman in the room not pregnant. And it was just a very dark time.
Yeah. And it's like you also said too, and the stressors then that puts on your relationship with your spouse also.
And he was understanding, but it's difficult for, I think, a man to know firsthand because, we are different and it's happening to my body and not his. And so I think he was as understanding as he could be. It was very, very hard for me.
Yeah. And that just causes another layer of frustration and that feeling of nobody understands.
And again, in hindsight, I didn't realize this at the time, but the main thing that I was struggling with was that I had a misplaced identity because I was making my identity based on a role in life. I want to be a mom, or I'm infertile. You can't base your life on a role or your circumstances. You have to base it on who God says you are. And I wasn't seeing myself as child of God. That identity, child of God, never changes no matter what your circumstances. Because your role in life will change. You start off single and then you're a wife, but if your spouse dies and you're a widow. And so it's like, you just can't base your identity on those things.
Yeah. Our society is so quick to put labels, and we're so quick to put labels on ourselves too, and then identify with that. And that also is part of that whole, what you were talking about, that comparison trap that we fall into, is that, okay, now I'm inadequate. And, now it's the negative self-talk that the enemy uses to come into us in order to keep pushing us further away from God.
And, my struggles with comparison and a misplaced identity, they affected friendships in many ways. In some ways I learned which friends were supportive and sensitive and which ones were not. And, that kind of naturally led to the end of some friendships. And, I got to the point where I stopped attending baby showers and meeting my friends' newborns because it was just too hard. I was trying to handle all of that pain by myself instead of relying on God to carry me through. Mm-hmm. And on my own, I'm very weak. And so I couldn't handle it.
It's such a personal issue also, is that, when women are struggling with it, it's one of those things that we just don't talk about with each other. We don't talk about it with our friends. We don't talk about it with a family, or even, our church community, whether you're involved in women's groups or things of that nature. It's just not talked about because it's a difficult and it's a very personal struggle. But then again, like you were saying, you get this misplaced identity and you're forgetting who you are. It's just, you almost lose yourself.
It definitely felt like that.
I'm fortunate enough where I personally didn't struggle with this, but I had, one of my sisters did for quite a number of years. And it was just, just seeing that pain and that anguish, and not knowing what to do, not knowing how to fix it, not knowing, I'm the big sister. So, similar to you, it's like, you sweep in, you solve problems, you make things better. And it's almost like a sense of helplessness. And I'm sure, that's also what you were feeling, because it's like, I can't control this. And I don't know, it's almost like that crying out, like, why? Why am I going through this, God? Why? And that is frustrating, but can also be very freeing. And sometimes when you actually release that, but you were holding it in, it sounds like.
Oh, yes, very tightly. And so, a couple years into our infertility, kind of near the end of 2012, Michael and I watched a documentary called Forks Over Knives, and it talks about the benefits of eating a plant-based diet. And so we decided to give that a try. We thought maybe it would help with conceiving, but also just kind of general health and family history. Michael was 26 at the time, and he already had high cholesterol, and his dad died of cancer when Michael was 9 years old. And so, we just wanted to do what we could to prevent letting that family history become our destiny. And it did improve our health in a lot of ways. So we've stuck with it now for almost 8 years, but we still didn't conceive. The reason I'm sharing about this diet change, it will become evident later. I'll circle back to this. Again, on a plant-based diet, still all of our diagnostic testing was normal. And so then we were at a crossroads. We could either pursue fertility treatments or adoption. Before we struggled with infertility, I viewed adoption as like, oh, what a nice charitable thing, for you other families to do, but, and then just being totally transparent, during our early years of infertility, I viewed adoption as failure. That meant that I failed to figure out the formula to create a life. I was, like you said, I was just holding on very tightly to that control, and I just was not ready to let that go. But God is thankfully so patient and gracious, and he was present through all of those dark years and dark thoughts, and he never ceased trying to work on and grow my heart. And he slowly led me out of hopelessness, and he changed both of our hearts about adoption. And that was the route that we felt like God was leading us toward, not fertility treatments. And so near the end of 2013, we started researching adoption agencies, and we were on the waiting list to apply for a local agency. But the wait list was going to be like a couple years at least before you would likely receive a child. And we just didn't want to wait that long. And so a friend had told me about GladMe, and we checked it out, and we ended up picking them. And they're a larger adoption agency. So in March of 2014, we submitted our application to GladMe, and unbeknownst to us, that was the month that our daughter was conceived. And it was, again, we didn't know it at the time. And so we just, we faithfully acted in that direction that we felt like God was moving us toward. And I'm thankful with how it worked out. And there's a lot of details I can go into. For those that don't know, the adoption application process is really intense, so much paperwork, a home study. They have like in-depth interviews where they really get all up in your business about your childhood and your marriage and parenting styles. And then you have to answer questions about what ethnicity and medical conditions you're open to, what about rape or incest situations, drug and alcohol use by the birth parents. It's just, it can be overwhelming, and it's not something that parents having a biological child really ever have to think about. And so that's tempting to think that like, oh, it's not fair. But really, if you think about it, I get it. Like the goal is to make sure that the child is matched to parents that are truly open, because that's what's best for the child. And so it's really important as adoptive parents to be honest with what you're really open to and what you're not open to. And those can be hard conversations, but it's really important.
Yeah. And that's what I was just going to say. It, like you were saying, it forces you to think about your own perspective on issues that, if you were, naturally conceiving, you wouldn't have to think about, but then also have those conversations with your spouse and, work through any differences that the two of you may have regarding those certain areas.
Yeah. And hopefully you are close to being on the same page, if not, but sometimes I'm sure it happens where you're not. Thankfully with Michael and I, we were, but it would be much harder if you're like starting on opposite ends of a spectrum and have to meet in the middle. But again, it's important that you're both ready and pray about that and see what God is really leading you toward, and just being very honest about how you feel.
And so I want to take a step back because I have two questions. One, was it during this time that you started your blog?
Yes, it was actually during, it was probably within the first couple months of trying to conceive. I've always liked using writing as an outlet for my emotions. And back then, blogging was like the thing to do. And so I started a blog back then and just would share about how I felt and like, I'm hopeful this month. And then, oh, I'm sad that it didn't work out. And so, yeah, it definitely kind of tracked my journey over the years.
Yeah, but it's also, like you said, it also helps you start to work through some of those emotions that you were feeling. But at one point, because, you've mentioned this a couple times, is that, you like to be in control. You're now talking about, adoption and praying and, here we are 3 years later. At what point did you finally realize, like, this is not my control? Like, I've got to give this up. And kind of what did that look like for you?
Well, regarding adoption, like I said, it was a very slow process. I didn't have like one moment where I was like, aha, okay, God, I hear you, like my heart is instantly changed. It was very subtle through friendships with people that had adopted children and, seeing movies that maybe portrayed the beauty of adoption and how there can be redemption in that. It was definitely a slow process that I think God was working in both of our hearts to bring us to the same place and time of, considering that as like the next step for us. But yeah, I'll definitely get to a point later where I had like a very clear, like moment of epiphany about my control. And it all needed to happen,
It always does. Okay. So now you found this adoption agency. You're in the process of going through the study, because that's really what it is. It's not even just like a home visit anymore, like they used to call it. It is an intense process. You started that process in March of 2014. Where did that lead to?
So we were officially accepted as a waiting family in August of that same year, 2014. And so then we got to make our life book and our online profiles, which was really fun to get to display our personalities and hobbies and traditions and things. But we were self-conscious about putting the fact that we eat a plant-based diet in our profile because, honestly, we thought, we live in Texas. No birth mother will want to pick a couple of crazy leaf-eating hippies to adopt her baby.
As being a fellow vegan, I hear you. I get it. I know the judgment.
There's so few of us out there.
It's growing, though. It is growing.
It is. But, Gladney just encouraged us to be ourselves. And they said that if that's important to us, then that's something that we should feel comfortable putting in our profile. And so kind of reluctantly we did. And they told us that from that time on in August, we should expect an average wait time of about 15 months to be matched with a birth mother. So now I'm kind of coming back around to God really showing me about my control issue. Later that same month, I had an appointment with an endocrinologist to see if I had a thyroid issue, because I was still holding on to the hope that maybe we could get pregnant soon and then adopt a baby at some point later in the future. I definitely felt like God was calling us to adopt, but I was still holding on to that hope that maybe we could get pregnant first. And that appointment went horribly. He was so condescending. He literally, one of the things he said was literally, the reason you can't get pregnant is because you eat a vegan diet, which is ridiculous because for the first 2 years of our infertility, I wasn't eating a plant-based diet. So clearly that could not be the cause of our infertility. And, he said several other condescending things. And when I got back to my car, I broke down and started crying. And I literally cried out to God and I said, that's it. I quit. I said, God, if you want to make us parents, then you will. And if I never get pregnant, I'm still going to trust you. And that was my moment of brokenness that the past 4 years had been culminating toward. I finally surrendered our desires and our journey to become parents to the one who was really in control all along. And I turned off that control mode switch. As you alluded to earlier, it was so freeing. My circumstances still had not changed, but my heart had. And I felt so much peace in having surrendered to God and decided to trust him and his plans instead of my own. I'm so thankful for that horrible appointment because that really needed to happen in my heart. The next month, September, Michael's mom, who was 61 at the time, she was diagnosed with metastatic breast cancer, and she was told that she only had months left to live. And so we were really sad to learn that she might not live long enough to meet a future child that, either biologically or through adoption, because we still didn't know how long we would have to wait in the adoption process. We couldn't change that situation either. And so we just tried to enjoy the time that we had left with her. In November, a friend that I've known since kindergarten, who was married and living in Hawaii at the time because her husband is in the military, she messaged me and she said that she was home visiting her parents in our city and that she had a lot of extra breast milk that she couldn't fly back with her. And she asked if I wanted to take it just in case we happened to adopt a baby within the next year, because that's about how long you can keep milk stored in the freezer before it spoils. And we were so grateful for that offer. And so we went and picked up the milk on November 16th, still not knowing how long we would have left to wait to be matched for an adoption. But 3 days later, on November 19th, we got the call. A birth mother had picked us to adopt her baby. And again, here's where I'm circling back to our diet change. She is a diehard vegetarian, and she loved that we were going to raise her baby with similar values. And she was having a girl, and she was due 1 month from that day. We were just overjoyed. I immediately started weeping. I had to hand the phone to Michael.
Oh my gosh.
And, just because the very thing that we were self-conscious about putting in our profile was the very thing that she connected the most with. It was such a beautiful moment. We felt instant love and gratitude that this young girl picked us out of all of the options of adoptive parents out there to give us such a precious gift.
Oh. So let's just take a step back for those who aren't familiar with the process. And so it's not like, you're looking through pictures of babies or kids to say, yes, this is who I want. You're actually waiting for that call for a potential parent to pick you.
Right. I think it used to be the other way around in the past, but now it's very much birth mother initiated. Up until the point that she signs relinquishment, she has complete control over who gets to raise her baby. She can back out at any time. And so, I've had friends that have sadly been matched with a birth mother and she's delivered the baby and then she's, decided to parent. And that is how God designed it to be. God designed mothers to raise their biological children. And, there's always brokenness in adoption in some form or another, but it can be very hard when, you are an adoptive parent and you get your hopes up and you think like, okay, this is it. But you have to really kind of just hold back and trust and just keep trusting up until the point that, it's really in your hands again.
Yeah.
I suppose it never really is in your hands, but like until something's signed, it's not in your control.
Correct. And even still, I mean, after that, there's always that, little threat that kind of looms out there where that, is this mom going to change her mind and try then to cancel the agreement or, maybe come back? Like there's so many things that go into it. And there's been so many, legal cases surrounding it also too. But so you get the call November 19th, you said?
Yes.
And so you've got 1 month now to prepare?
Yes. And so about a week or so after we got the call, we met the birth family so the birth mother was still pregnant, and that was really fun. We, got to meet the birth father as well and his family. And so it was just really neat to meet so many members of the birth family and get to know them. And at one point I remember the birth mother asked me what we were planning to name the baby. And I said, Elizabeth. And it was really cool. She looked at her mom and she said, that's the name that we had picked. And it's like, talk about full body chills.
Oh.
Yeah, but you're right. Because of how long we were told the average wait time would be, and the fact that we were focusing on Michael's mom's, last months to live, we were not expecting a baby so soon. And so we had nothing. We had an empty room, that we had nothing baby related. And so my friends threw together a massive baby shower in just 2 weeks. And I have since co-hosted many showers, and I know how difficult that is to do. And so between friends and family and coworkers, they provided us with everything. I mean, we were so thankful for them, especially with the short notice. Michael's mom's health was declining to the point that she had to be hospitalized. And so, I mean, we were under so much stress at the time. But yeah, it was a month after we got the call. So mid-December, and the birth mother was induced, and the birth family invited us to be at the hospital and to wait in the waiting room with their family members. And the birth grandmother called me from the delivery room so that I could hear our daughter's first cry. So sweet. And then they also invited us to come in the room shortly after to hold her for the first hour of life so that we could start bonding right away. And, like I said, the laws in Texas, at least, I don't know about every state, but this was such a gift because in Texas, the law does not let birth parents sign relinquishment papers before the baby is 48 hours old. And so anytime that you get with the potential adopted baby prior to those relinquishment papers being signed, it doesn't have to be shared with you, but they wanted us there. And that was just, they were just so wonderful. They did both sign at 48 hours. And so we got to take our daughter home at 2 days old. We're finally parents, and thankfully, Michael's mom did get to meet Elizabeth, but by that point, she was so sick that she couldn't speak or hold her, but she was smiling bigger than we had seen her smile in weeks. I mean, you could just see the joy of getting to see her granddaughter. And she ended up dying 8 days after Elizabeth was born.
Wow.
So that month was just high highs and low lows. I mean, it was crazy,
yes.
But God really provided and just carried us through.
And when did it sink into you to say, I'm a mom? You're a family. You call, you look at Michael and you're like, hey, Dad,
Yeah, it was, especially when you adopt as opposed to carrying a child in your womb for 9 months, it was very surreal. Like I said, we didn't have any baby stuff. We also didn't really have time to read anything about newborn care. I mean, we took one class, but I felt so inadequate. And so I remember the moment that the birth grandmother handed Elizabeth to me in the hospital room. And I remember thinking in the same moment, like, oh, she's so beautiful. And then also, oh my gosh, I have no idea how to do this thing. And so it was just, it was a very surreal moment. But I'm thankful to say that instincts that I didn't know I had kicked in, and, you figure it out. And it came very naturally. Praise the Lord.
It is. And like, were there times that you would sit there and you would look at Michael when he was with Elizabeth and like, I still can't believe that this is our family. Like, I can't believe what I'm seeing.
Oh, definitely. That you hear a lot that like a man, your man is never as attractive as when he's holding a baby. And that's so true. It was so wonderful to see him as a dad, and he's such a great dad. And it was really sweet to see that.
So now you've got your family that you've always wanted. Hello, surprise. God working in another way.
Yeah. So, I do want to just back up and just say that like during Elizabeth's first year of life, I also emailed the birth family pictures and videos and anecdotes about her personality and her milestones, because I really wanted them to feel included. And over the years, we have developed a very open adoption relationship. We visit them several times a year, and we consider one another family. And it's really beautiful how God knew all of the details of our story long before we did. And, our journey to get to that point just helped me realize how worthy of my trust he is, and yeah, like you said, our story wasn't even over.
It really sounds like you are, I work with children. I've worked with children in education for years. And, it sounds like even from the beginning, it's like you have not hidden this from Elizabeth. It's like, no, we've got, our family looks different than some families, but they are a part of it. And that is so nice to hear.
And that's definitely the current atmosphere of adoption these days is, it's best for the child to grow up knowing that they are adopted as opposed to it being like a surprise later. And so for her, it's just, I've even before I think she could understand the words, I would talk to her about her birth family and how her birth mother, carried her in her tummy, but she grew in my heart, and that sort of, language. And she's asked questions as she's gotten older. And I'm just thankful there's a lot of resources to be able to help me know what to say or how, maybe how to phrase things. And, but yeah, it's not a typical situation, but for her, it's her normal, and there's nothing strange about it. I don't think from her perspective at this point, she calls her birth grandparents, grandparent names, Nana and Papa and Nanny. So it's very natural for her, and we love them so much too that we're just all one big family.
And that's such a beautiful gift that you're able to give Elizabeth, because like you said, you now have more family members.
Since Michael's parents are both passed, my parents are still around, but that could feel very small if that was all there was. And so now there's like another set of grandparents, 2 sets.
Okay. So now probably about 2.5 years later.
Yeah. So Elizabeth was 2, and I started hearing this thought in my head that said, your body is healed and your womb is open.
Wow.
And that is so unlike me to think that, because, as I've shared, I've struggled with seeing myself as broken. And so that's just not the kind of thought that I naturally would come up with on my own, it had been 6 years at this point of unprotected sex, and we still had never conceived. And I started to feel open to pursuing fertility treatments, which is something that I had never felt peace about before. Mm. I had also heard about something called embryo adoption that, sounded like something I would be open to. I'm not sure of the exact definition, but I believe it's when couples go through IVF treatments and they have embryos that they're not able to transfer themselves. And so they can donate them to couples that can't produce quality embryos, or, couples that want to just try that as an option to get pregnant. Mm-hmm. And so for weeks I was having these thoughts. And so I finally decided to share these thoughts with Michael so that he would know where I was at. And to my surprise, he said that he too had been thinking recently about feeling open to fertility treatments, which is very unlike my husband. He has many hobbies and interests, but sitting around thinking about fertility treatments is not one of them. And so it seemed clear that God was trying to tell us something. And after I described embryo adoption, he also felt open to that. And so again, kind of like with the adoption situation, okay, well, let's step out in faith here. And so I scheduled a first appointment with a fertility clinic for, this would be mid-March of 2017. But in the first week of March, I realized that I was a day late for my expected period to start. And at the time I was very regular clockwork, like every 4 weeks. And I kept trying to talk myself out of taking a home pregnancy test, because for the past 6 years, all I saw was just one sad, disappointing line. Mm-hmm. And, I used to even when I would take a test, I would hold it under super bright lights and squint my eyes, desperate to see the faintest of a second line, but I just never saw it. And I managed to wait 3 days after my expected period, and I was cleaning the toilet, and I finally just gave in. I took a home pregnancy test, and, normally you have to wait 3 minutes before you can read the results. But as soon as I dipped the test in the urine and I was going to set it down to start waiting the 3 minutes, I saw a very bold second line. I was shocked. I mean, I blinked a few times in case my eyes were playing funny, but it was very clear, and I felt just shocked and overjoyed. And, some wives may be the type of person that can keep that news to themselves for a bit and then plan some elaborate way to surprise their husband, but I'm not one of those women. So my strategy was to run out of the bathroom holding the positive test. I was perplexed to no longer see Michael in the living room where I last saw him a few minutes ago. But I heard Elizabeth crying from her room. And so I figured that maybe he's in there comforting her. And so that gave me the chance to grab my cell phone, and I started recording video. And I went in and I was holding up the test, and I said, "This is why I haven't started my period yet." His reaction was really funny. He said, "What does that mean?" And he said he was unsure of how to react. He didn't want to assume something if it wasn't true. And so I said, "I'm pregnant." And we both started crying and hugging, and we were just so thankful that, God had given us that gift of life after so many years. He showed us that he can make the impossible possible. And, I knew that getting pregnant is no guarantee. Plenty could still go wrong at any time, because tomorrow's never promised to any of us. And so we just tried to have a thankful heart for each day that we did have with that little life. But thankfully, it was his plan that life continue. And so our daughter, Catherine, was born later that year, and she's now 2 years old. She's 2.
Wow. That's beautiful. I can just picture you running through the house.
Yeah, I had no strategy there.
No self-control, no strategy. Oh, goodness. And now here you are 2 years later.
Yeah.
Expecting number 3.
Yes. And before we got to this pregnancy, we did have some losses. Yeah. Because of our struggles with infertility, we've always desired to have a big family, as many kids as God wants to give us, honestly, even if it's 10, that doesn't scare us. And so at the beginning of last year, I found out that I was pregnant again. And I didn't really know when exactly we conceived, because I was still nursing Catherine. So my cycles were abnormal, but we were, again, delighted that God had given us another gift of life. Similar to my pregnancy with Catherine, I started feeling nauseous around 5 or 6 weeks, and I was still feeling that way at 8.5 weeks. But one night when I went to the bathroom, there was light bleeding, and it looked just like I started my period. And, I immediately became fearful, because that's just not what you want to see when you're pregnant. And I went to my doctor the next morning, and she confirmed via ultrasound that she didn't see a baby. And, I hadn't had a first ultrasound up to that point. So, I sadly didn't get to hear a heartbeat at any point or anything, but it was very heartbreaking, going home knowing that there was no longer life in my womb, and just felt empty, but I never doubted God's goodness. But there's definitely grief and mourning, when you experience loss. And I grieved for a while as I waited for my body to pass everything. And as time went on, you never know what's going to trigger your grief.
Yeah.
Like, I remember a friend from Bible study. She and I got pregnant around the same time, and I randomly ran into her at a gas station out of town while we were both traveling. Like, what are the odds of that? And her pregnant belly was showing at that point. And it just kind of hit me in that moment of like, oh, if I hadn't lost my baby, my belly would look like that, and it wasn't a bitter thought. It was, I was happy for her, but it was just like an unexpected moment that triggered my grief. And, physical space would trigger it. Like, we were organizing the house, and I was not wanting to remove baby items from Catherine's room because, that's supposed to be the next baby's room. And we didn't have another baby yet. And so it was just very hard. But
it sounds like it was very different this time than from prior when you were trying to get pregnant. You talked about the frustration and the misplaced identity and, you not wanting to be around people. Whereas this sounds like it was just more of that authentic loss.
Absolutely. Yeah. The key difference was I still didn't have control with this loss, but I never doubted who God is and who he says I am. And it was just a sad thing to live through, which is normal, to feel that. But it was definitely not that my heart was in the right place. Like, I was not trying to fight against God and control everything like I was before. And so there wasn't that hopelessness and depression that I had before. Yeah. So I was really thankful for that. And we ended up conceiving again in this past September. But it was like, I basically started my period on time. I had just done a very early pregnancy test. And so, I wouldn't have even known if I hadn't done that. And, it was still kind of like my hopes were up for a couple of days. And then we realized that loss. And, just during the past year, it was a hard year last year for me. I just had to continually surrender my grief to God and just trust, that his plans are better than mine. And there's sweetness to that. God continued to comfort me last year through like prayer time and placing specific scripture verses in my mind, sweet friends just supporting me and praying for me. I also heard on a podcast about pregnancy loss, something that was so encouraging to me. And it said that if each of us are created to be worshipers of God, then how marvelous is it that, my womb got to play a role in creating yet another worshiper of God.
That's beautiful.
So beautiful. Yeah. I love that. And so then, at getting to where we are now, at the end of last year, we were at the point where we had ruled out any genetic or diagnosable cause of the two losses. But we still wanted to have more children, and we were open to maybe pursuing like an IUI. And so, but before we could even get to that point, I found out that I was pregnant with this one. So I'm just so thankful. I remember it being a big struggle during my first trimester to get, especially getting to the same point as my first loss. Fear was always threatening to creep in, but God just spoke to me in so many different ways, just constantly reminding me that he sees me and he deeply cares for me, and to just keep trusting him. I kept Philippians 4:4-8 on a tab in my cell phone's browser. And whenever I would feel like fear threatening to take over, I would just open that up and just read those verses over and over. Just through prayer, God also convicted me about just remembering that my identity is in him. And so don't let this baby or any baby define my life, but just remember that he's in control no matter what the outcome is, and just trust him. And, it's just been such a gift with every ultrasound and hearing the heartbeat and seeing her move and grow. I'm just really thankful that everything's been going well so far. And I pray that it continues.
And when are you due?
October.
Okay. So you got to get through the Texas summer.
Yes. I'm grateful for air conditioning.
Yes. And so when did you decide to start telling people? Because that's also something that I've heard from women who have gone through this, is that they waited until at least after they were past the point of their first loss.
Yeah, that's a really great question. Because when I was pregnant with Catherine, we were so excited after so many years of not being able to conceive that we told people right away, because we just wanted to share our joy and recognize that this may end tomorrow, but like, we are going to praise God and give him glory for the gift that he's given us today. Mm-hmm. And so we told friends and family right away. Then when I had done the same thing with our first loss, I hadn't posted on social media yet, but I had told friends and family. And so I remember that being hard after I knew that I was miscarrying, to have to like go back and tell everyone like, okay, it's a loss. I'm sad to say that we lost the baby. And, so then with this pregnancy, I held it a lot closer, and I guess I hadn't really thought about why, but I think there's wisdom in that. That's true. And it wasn't out of fear so much, but it was just, I only told family, and like, I have like kind of an inner circle of women that are my closest friends. And so I immediately told them and asked them to pray, and I would like update them with each ultrasound. And they were just, they were kind of my trusted group that I knew, even if it ended in a loss, that they were going to be there to support me and love me. And, but yeah, we waited until I think 9 weeks, maybe. Okay. So definitely past the first loss point, because I also had more ultrasounds with this pregnancy than I didn't have any with the first loss. And so I could see that things were progressing, and, still it's no guarantee, but we did end up sharing with everyone around 9 weeks.
That's great. And I know that you mentioned that both you and Michael are open to having a very large family. Is adoption still on the table? Is that still part of the conversation in order to grow your family?
We are definitely open to it. Financially at this point, we're not in a position to be able to pursue that at this time, but it's definitely, I think, always going to be something that we're open to in our hearts. And so, given our story and how God has worked all the details out, I know that if there's a child out there that we are meant to adopt, then there's no way we're going to miss out on his will, like somehow, even if we're not working with an agency, like that child will end up with us. So
that's wonderful. Yeah. Wonderful to hear. Yeah. I mean, you're going to have 3 under 5. So 5 and under, that's crazy. You're going to have your hands full.
Yeah. Well, thankfully, Elizabeth she's very mature and helpful. So she's so excited to have another little sister.
That's exciting. Exciting. One of the things that caught my attention on your blog, and, I love how God works sometimes, is that I have a good friend of mine. She's struggling right now with infertility and getting pregnant and going through a lot of what you talked about, that comparison, and everywhere she looks that there's a baby or there's a pregnant woman, and, she's really, really struggling with it. But one of the things that you put up, which helped me a lot as a friend, is what to say to somebody who is struggling, or somebody who is just went through a loss. And so, I think that that's also great that you were able to, through your blog, be able to help not only, connect with women who are struggling with pregnancy and possibly infertility, but also for those of us who are around them. Because like I said, there's those of us who are around them who, sometimes I don't know what to say. And it's like, and I'll tell her that, cause she's a good friend, and I'll be like, I just don't know what to say right now, but let's pray. And that's all I can do.
And I think that's so great that, you want to love her in a way that is going to help her feel supported, and that was definitely my heart behind it, because I experienced a lot of hurtful and insensitive comments and questions, during our infertility. And it used to like greatly offend me, cause I hadn't surrendered fully to God yet. But now I can give people a lot more grace, because like, I know that not everyone has the same experiences and they don't know what to say. And there are situations that I'm in where a friend is hurting or going through something that I can't relate to. And so I'm sure I've said, insensitive things and hurtful things, but I wanted to encourage people to at least avoid some of the things that are obviously going to be hurtful. Yeah. And even if they're well-meaning and they didn't mean to offend, it's, I figure it's better to say it and hope that it helps someone.
Yeah. But what I loved about it and the way I connected with it was that it went beyond just being empathetic. It went beyond that. And it was a tool for me that I could use as a friend to support, what she's going through right now. Let's shift gears a little bit, because God's got another pulling on your heart right now. So you're working on a very special project.
I have felt like God has been prompting me to write a book about my story. And so over the last couple of years, I've been slowly working on that. And I'm at the point now where I have a rough draft written, and I'm looking into whether I should get a publisher to accept that, or do I go the self-publishing route? I'm just, there are options and, pros and cons either way. And I'm looking into that. I also started if you want to call it a small business, it's really more of a hobby at this point, called Mirror Ministry, because I've struggled with self-esteem for most of my life, and looking at myself in the mirror has often been a battleground. And so my heart behind Mirror Ministry was to design peelable stickers that you can place on your mirror to remind you of God's love for you and provide encouragement like where you need it most, like in the mirror. And so I have a small Etsy shop with some designs I've made so far, but I also enjoy making custom verses for friends if, depending on what they want. But yeah, it's definitely a slow process for both of these endeavors. I'm, like you said, I'm a mom of young kids, and so I'm trying to work faithfully, but it's slow going. I don't have a lot of spare time.
Yeah. And that body image topic is just so important. I mean, as somebody myself who struggled for countless years with almost a body dysmorphia and over exercise and controlled eating, I struggled for many, many years. And there's times even now where, those thoughts start creeping in and I'm like, not today, Satan. But I mean, I know myself, I used to have to write, Post-it notes or write in lipstick on my mirror, those types of messages. But what a great option for youngers. I mean, it's not even just girls. I mean, we're seeing now with the uptick and rise in young boys with body image issues and control issues. And like I said, there's days that, I even find myself slipping back into the old ways, and it's like, nope. And what do I go to my Bible. I said, what does my God tell me about beauty? What does he tell me about, me? And I think that is, it's going to be a beautiful thing for those who you can reach out and help through that.
Yeah. And so, at this point, I just have a simple website, ChristineYager.com. And that links to my Facebook page and Mirror Ministry, the Etsy shop. So, the Facebook page is probably the best place to keep up to date on my book progress. But, so thank you for that.
No problem. We'll have links for those in all the show notes. So people don't have to go hunting down for it. All right. Well, aside from Facebook, do you also have Instagram for people to connect with you?
I do. It's, I believe at Christine Yager.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I do this thing in one of my my private Facebook groups with a bunch of ladies called my Friday favorites. And so each week I give them 4 things that I'm loving during that week. And so I kind of wanted to make that part of the show. So let's talk about 4 things that you can't live without right now. So what are your 4 favorites?
I lately have been loving a show on ABC called Genetic Detective. And I think they may have already finished airing all the episodes for season 1. I think there are just 6, but you can catch up on Hulu or their website. But it's a really great show. It's I love true crime stuff, and it's about a woman named Cece Moore who works with law enforcement, and she will receive like a DNA sample of a suspect, and then she will get genetic matches of like very distant relatives, like sometimes 5th cousins. And so she'll use genealogy to like work up the matches side of the family tree and then find a common ancestor. And then she'll work down the suspect side of the tree. And then she'll be able to present law enforcement with like a very short list of, this is who your suspect likely is. And it's so fascinating.
I know. It's always fascinating for those of us who don't work in it. I've got our son and daughter-in-law both work in forensics. And so I'm always like probing them with questions. And they're like, really? We don't want to talk about work right now. So, but for those of us who aren't in it, it's fascinating.
I would do the same thing. And then another thing I've loved lately, I recently finished a book called Return to Joy by Bev DeSalvo. And it's just a beautiful book about sharing her story and her traumas, and just also this just beautiful intimacy that she developed with the Lord throughout. I just love stories and how God works through them and what he teaches you. And so her book was really good. And I think it can be kind of like a devotional. There's, questions at the end of each chapter. And, but another devotional that I love is called The Grace Walk Experience by Steve McVeigh. And that is, I think it's like a daily devotional workbook. And, like I said, I used to have a very skewed perspective about God. I used to think that he would be disappointed in me every time I sin, or, just that I had to be doing enough good for God, like reading my Bible enough, or like, pray enough. Like I was always struggling with that I'm not enough kind of mindset. And this workbook really helped me understand that that's not how God sees you. If you've accepted Christ, then he delights in you, and his love for you and his acceptance of you is not based on your behavior. It's based on what Christ has already done. And so that was very transformative for my heart. And then a third thing we talked about at the beginning, but our puppy Pepper, she is 1 year old and she is just so cute. She's the best dog we've ever had. And like, we've loved our previous dogs dearly. But she's half German Shepherd, a quarter Border Collie, and a quarter Australian cattle dog. And so she has like that really adorable mixture of like, she is very agile and like high energy, loves to catch and flip around catching her Frisbee, but she can still chill out and like, pass out on the couch. And she's very sweet, very loving. And she's so
and I'm
great.
sure protective of those 2 little girls.
Yeah. She and the thing about her is she genuinely loves to play with them. Like they'll run around the living room and like Pepper's just like, do, like, this is fun.
Now let me get out there and really run.
Yeah. The last thing I would say that I'm loving lately is, maybe not so much right now because Texas summers are brutal, but we love going on family walks in our neighborhood. It's just, a fun time to kind of get out of the house, especially during COVID stuff, and just talk and enjoy the outdoors.
And that's one of the beautiful things that I've noticed is I live on a cul-de-sac. And so, just the amount of families since March 13th that have been outside every day, riding bikes, taking walks, and, just doing things together is been a true blessing through this stressful time.
Yeah, it's a good flashback to like my childhood. It's like, that's how I used to play.
Exactly. Especially after a good rain.
Yeah.
Which you're not getting much of right now. Sorry.
Yeah.
Goodness. Well, Christine, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your vulnerability, your story, but then also the hope and encouragement that we all can get from that, no matter what we're struggling with. I really do appreciate your honesty because sometimes it's not easy to talk about that. And, thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Feed Your Spirit podcast. Be sure to visit all of the show notes to get all of the links for everything mentioned in today's show and to find out how you can connect with myself and Feed Your Spirit. Also, I'm happy to announce that we also have links for our new Feed Your Spirit Teespring shop, where you can find all your gear for fall, winter, and the upcoming months and show your support of the show. Today's episode was edited by Chris Nessie. More information for Chris can be found at chrisnessie.com. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share Feed Your Spirit. Take a quick screenshot, post it on your social medias. Oh, and don't forget to tag me, Jill Dobrowansky. Thank you again, and I look forward to feeding your spirit next time.